Welcome to MENSCHlife TV. I'm Doris Epstein. Today we have a remarkable person, a person who was a driving force in bringing great Canadian entertainment to the world and in developing, in fact, the Canadian music business. He went from being a high school dropout to getting the Order of Canada, and it's all here in his book, True North, the name of your record label, is that right?
That's correct,
your
yeah,
label?
that's right, yeah.
A life in the music business.
Right.
When you started, it was the beginning of an era that revolutionized culture all over, especially in North America. And Bruce Cockburn, who you represent, and whose career you represented, said about you, he's one of the founders and driving forces of a cultural movement that became an industry. But you didn't know all this then.
No, I certainly did not. I was going to high school in Downsview, not far from your studios, and I was a terrible student. Lots of reasons for that. My father was a career Air Force warrant officer, so I spent my whole life growing up on air bases. I went to 13 schools, and by the time we returned to Toronto, and I was in grade 10, I guess, going into grade 10, school didn't interest me anymore, and this was in the 60s.
But what interested you
in
grade 10?
Although I always, nothing, actually, other than to get out of school and to get out of home. No, I was, I think it would be wrong for me to sort of look backwards and say I plotted all this out. I think in the book I try to make it clear. Well, I always loved music, but I didn't know anything about the music business. There was no real, I'm fond of saying that there was no, I never even heard the words Canadian music industry until 1975, and now we're talking about 1964 when I left home. But what I was interested in was a kind of bohemian life that I'd been reading about. I read all the books of the Beat generation, Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs,
Kerouac.
Jack Kerouac for sure. And I went down to Yorkville one day to sort of check it out with the thought that maybe I could somehow find my place in that kind of world. Very imaginary world, but that's what I thought. And when I got to Yorkville, because of a series of sequence of events, I ended up in music, of course, which thrilled me and still thrills me. But it was not because I, as a young person, was driven to want to get involved in music. I loved music, but I loved other things just as much, and I didn't get involved in them neither. So
that was your destiny, even though you didn't know it.
That's the way it's turned out. It's very lucky for me that maybe the only thing I'm good at, I managed to find a way to do it.
It was a boring place, Toronto, then.
Well, I don't know.
It was just the beginning of a massive social change called the hippie era.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in that statement. I mean, Toronto, I can't claim, well, let's put it this way, Yorkville was never boring to me. So when I got to Yorkville, even before the hippie thing happened, I found it very exciting to be there, and lots of great things going on. But Toronto was a very quiet kind of city once you got outside of Yorkville. I guess you're right in a way that
until this happened.
Boring,
until this happened, the whole hippie sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Well, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I mean, that's a good way to pursue one's time.
And you were right in the middle of it.
I was.
You're one of the people. You're one of the people responsible for transforming Toronto in that sense. When you got involved, there was nothing much happening. Yeah,
well, there were. Now again, I don't like to take credit for things that I shouldn't take credit for.
Okay.
Yeah. There were people around doing things, but it was pretty disparate. There wasn't much really going on.
People were going to the United States.
You know what was going on is that there was a lot of great musical talent.
Joni
a lot
Mitchell.
of great talent. Joni Mitchell was there, Neil Young was there, a band called The Sparrow, who later became Steppenwolf, David Clayton Thomas, who became
Lighthouse,
famous.
Skip Prokop.
Well, now Skip Prokop was the first person I managed.
Really?
And he was a member of the Paupers. And it was the Paupers that first hired me to be their manager.
Did you know
And that
anything
was
about
the
being
first,
a manager?
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. But I was working in a club on Yorkville called the El Patio. I had 3 or 4 jobs. I was a janitor. They taught me how to make espresso. I always go like this because I learned how to operate one of those big old espresso machines. I was a bouncer, although there wasn't much bouncing to be done. It was a all ages era. You know, Yorkville didn't have any clubs with liquor at the time in the 60s. And one of my jobs was to clean up the club in the afternoon, and the owner of the club let bands rehearse. And one of the bands he let rehearse was the Paupers, and that included Skip Prokop. He was the leader of the band. When he formed Lighthouse, it was with Paul Hoffert, but that was later. But anyway, they were always hungry, and I had the key to the fridge. And although the owner of the club had said, "Don't feed the band. Don't feed the band," I used to make them sandwiches. And we were all the same age, you know, we were 18, 19, something like that. And then I would hear them talk. And they would talk about their problems, you know, how do you make a living doing this, even then, you know, and what was now sort of seen as the golden age of music was tough going still.
Especially then.
Yeah, and I always used to say, here's what I would do, here's what I would do. And one day, after a few months of that, they said, why don't you manage us?
Okay, we'll be back in just a minute with more Bernie Finklestein. When you came into it, all the serious musicians, the singers, were going to the United States.
Yeah.
That was where you made it.
They had to, you know, there was no business here for them to get involved in. If you wanted to make a record and have a reasonable opportunity for that record to do well, you more or less had to go to the U.S. Now, you know, there were some exceptions.
So you took your first group, the Paupers, to New York.
I did. Well, we stayed here in Toronto, but yeah, we got a record deal in New York at MGM. It's a label owned by MGM called Verve, which is still going, by the way. And we took the band down to New York
What was
to
the
perform.
reception? Who ever heard of Canadian music then?
Well, not a lot of people. A lot of people didn't know. In fact, an interesting story to tell you is that I had this opportunity to get the Paupers their first gig in New York at a very famous club called the Cafe A-Go-Go. I'm trying to make the story short. And the owner of the club offered me an engagement with Ian and Sylvia. And the reason I tell you this is because the owner of the club said, well, you know, you're all Canadians. And that's what he knew of Canada. He said, you know, so it'll be a good show because you're all Canadians. But of course, it wouldn't have been a good show. Now, Ian and Sylvia were heroes of mine then, and they were very, very successful with 4 Strong Winds. But it was the wrong booking. And I took a booking with a band that had yet to play in New York, had yet to release their first record, but I'd heard a lot about, called the Jefferson Airplane. And we ended up having the opening slot for their show, their debut in New York. And it caused a sensation, the Paupers, and I became partners with Bob Dylan's manager, although not in the management of Bob Dylan, just for clarity for people, but with Albert Grossman.
Who's a famous name in the music business.
Well, he sure was. He was as famous as you could get, and it was a wonderful break
became a
for
partner
me.
For you. How old were you then?
I was about 19, 20.
What did he
maybe.
see in you then?
Well, he wanted my band, for one thing. So, you know, I mean, the music business is a very simple business, you know. It's not,
You said the
it's
music-
not very complicated, you know. Like
But you
people
say-
want success, you know, in the end. I mean, it gets a little bit more complicated when you start talking about the art, which one should never ever
But
forget.
you say the music business
yeah.
is not for the faint-hearted.
No, it's
You
not.
say in
No,
your
because
book.
there's a lot of, I mean, people are very thrilled that I got 50 gold records, but I put out 550 records. So, there was 500 times where we didn't do well. So, or at least relatively well. I mean, I think actually, as far as I'm concerned, some of those records were very successful, even if they weren't certified gold. But so you've got to be prepared every hour of every day, 7 days a week, to have some disappointment, because it's always going to be right around the corner. Things, no matter how well you're doing, something goes wrong.
So who did you meet at that time that kept you going? What kept you going in such an unstable, unpredictable, and really pioneer
Well, I liked
era?
it.
That's it, just the plain
I
and
actually
simple.
just liked it. I mean, no one person or no one thing kept me going.
Did you like the lifestyle, the sex, drugs, and
Well,
rock
it
and
was the
roll?
only
Were you into
lifestyle
it?
I knew. I don't want to exaggerate that. I don't want to exaggerate that too much, but I like rock and roll. Let's put it that way. But
The psychedelic drugs.
I got involved in the drug scene in the '60s. It was impossible not to. I suppose anything was
It was
possible.
part of the scene.
It was part of the culture, and I write about it extensively in the book. Not extensively. I try not to glamorize it. I don't endorse it, but I don't put it down neither.
Because you
it's
just simply
it's
that
just
you
part.
lived it.
It's just part of the life, and I survived, and here I am,
Barely,
so to speak.
thanks to your wife.
Well, my wife's a very important part of my life.
But
There's
you
no question
changed.
about
You
that.
changed when you met her, didn't you?
I
You
changed
gave it
when I
up.
met my wife. Oh well, we were having children, and there's nothing like the responsibility of.
So you became a solid citizen?
No, not a chance. I'm not going to let you tag me with something as nasty as that. But I wanted to have healthy children. Let's put it that way, and I did.
And you did. You have two sons?
Thank God.
Are they in the music business?
My youngest son is in the music business. His name is Noah. My oldest son lives in London, England, and he's not in the music business. But my youngest son is, yeah.
So he's following his father's footsteps.
Yeah, well, my oldest son ended up living in London. He graduated from university and went to London with his girlfriend, and then he never came back. I mean, he's come back to visit, but he loved the life in England and decided to stay there. My youngest son worked for me at my company.
True North.
Right, up until when I sold it, of course. And then he continued to work with me, and we still do some work together, but he's more on his own now.
It was a very exciting time. It was a very exciting time in North America.
It was.
Even though people were older, everybody got changed by that revolution. And it was expressed above all in music. Who, in your opinion, expressed the quintessential culture of that time? Peace and love and sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Well,
Bob Dylan.
That's a big question, but I mean, I suppose you just got to pick the obvious
And
answers
who were
here.
you
Like,
involved with?
the
at that-
the Beatles, and you followed their career from 1961, although we didn't become aware of them until 1963. And you just saw how they changed, and they changed. They not only changed with the times, they probably changed the times. And Bob Dylan certainly, although if you ever get him in your studio, good luck.
And Canadians,
He would tell you that he would not even answer these
Canadians are right
questions.
up there now
But-
too,
but,
and people that you
yeah.
developed,
Yeah.
such as
The people that I worked with, Bruce Coburn, Murray McLaughlin, Carol Pope and Rough Trade were really
They're
a
yours.
game changer. Carol Pope was one of the first people in the music business to come out of the closet. And by coming out of the closet, I don't mean she stood there and said, "I'm gay." her records were about her lifestyle. And so records like Avoid Freud, with songs like High School Confidential.
Sexual explicitness.
Sexual revolution that was going on.
It was.
And to some degree, and a kind of more freer attitude towards things, which I think were game changers.
Okay, we'll be back with more with Bernie Finklestein. Stay with us. Bernie, I want to go back to your very unusual growing up. Your father was in the Canadian Air Force.
Right.
He was a permanent member of the Canadian Air Force. That was the way he made a living.
That's right. That's right.
And you moved from one air base to another in
Right.
Canada and England. In
Yeah.
fact, your bar mitzvah was in Nottingham, England.
That's right. That's right.
You were the only Finklestein on
Yes.
an air. You must have been the only Finklestein, the only
Yeah,
Jewish family.
I think that often we were the only Jewish family on the air base.
What was that like? What was that
I
like?
remember sometimes my father would bring back some young airmen. I remember once a guy named, I think his name was Lightstone. But that's the only time I remember that he was a pilot. But what was it like? Well, it was fine. I mean, to be truthful, I mean, I could over romanticize it, but I won't. I was a life that it was the only, when you're young and you're going through what you're going through, you don't have anything to.
You don't reflect. You just
yeah,
live.
you can't
But
say
you're reflecting now.
oh,
Reflect on
I
it
missed
now.
the life I'm missing because you don't even know what it was. But I think that what people like to ask really is, was did I feel any anti-Semitism? I mean, I think that's what you're really probably most interested in. And the answer is remarkably very, very, very little. To say none would be a lie, but it was more about, when you're a young kid and you're going into grade 4, you know what you have to do when you go to school in the middle of the year, you change schools, which is what would happen. You'd have to stand up and you got introduced to the class. So they would say, the new boy, stand up, say your name. And so you'd say Bernie Finklestein. Well, that sounded like a funny name to people. So to that degree,
That was the only thing.
that to me, yeah, because I made a lot of good friends, and maybe I'm, a friend of mine once said, Bernie, you're great. You live an unexamined life, and maybe I didn't. Maybe I just had the kind of personality that didn't really pay a lot of attention because, those kinds of things should be very important, and very important to get rid of anything of that nature. But I had really a positive childhood, positive experiences, and so that's it. I mean, I had no real problems.
Except moving from place to place.
Well,
Maybe
even
that was not.
no.
accepted,
It was it created certain problems, but I would never whine about it. I mean, I talk about the fact that I got to do these great train trips and, go on boats when we got transferred to England, and living on air bases was great. I mean, I learned how to drive a car when I was 16 on the air base in Trenton. I mean, how wonderful is that to be able to go on this deserted air base on these roads where there was no traffic and learn how to drive. All I had to do was worry about whether there was an airplane going to land on me.
Let's jump to now.
Yeah.
You had a very heady, stimulating, exciting life in the music business.
I guess I did.
You knew everybody, and everybody knew you.
Yes, it's true. It's true.
From stars to business to, you had a huge range of people.
Right.
And you lived it. It wasn't something you did 9 to 5. It was your entire life. Do you miss the excitement?
Well, I don't actually miss it
You
at
live
all.
now in the country?
I have a place in Toronto, but I live mostly in Prince Edward County, near Picton, Ontario, south of
That's a
Belleville.
pretty quiet life.
Yeah, there's 40 vineyards there, and it's Ontario's latest, or Canada's newest
But
wine.
it's still a
wine
quiet
region.
life. compared to how you live.
Well, it is, but recently, you know, I sort of went right from selling my business to writing the book. Now the book is out, so I'm out promoting it. I suppose at some point I'm going to have to go, well, what do I really want to do now? But I haven't had a chance to really think that way. But the short answer is I don't really miss the music business. I mean, I miss a lot of the people. I loved what I did, but when my time was done, it was done. And I knew it was done. And, you know, that's it. So, you know, I'm enjoying trying to sell the book now, which occupies so much of my time that I haven't had a chance to think about it lately.
What do you think of music today, the popular music?
Well, I'm not an expert, but what I hear I really like. I mean, whether it's, you know, the obvious names like Leslie Feist, Arcade Fire,
Do you keep up with the music?
No, I don't really keep up with it. You know, I don't. I did for 45 years, and when I wrote the book, I couldn't listen. I wanted to always have music on. I really can't live without music. But what I found is I couldn't listen to songs with lyrics, so I started listening to a lot of jazz. And now I got into the habit of listening to jazz, so I tend to listen to a lot of jazz these days. But not because I think it's better than rock and roll, it's just sort of like changing my habits. As far as contemporary music goes, there's loads of really, really good music, and it's a very complicated question as to, you know, is it as good, you know, is music as good as it was? And I don't really think that I exactly know the answer, or anybody else does. You know what I think, though, is obvious, is that music is not as big as it was. Some things are as big, so let me not, I mean, obviously at the top end, things that get really big are huge. And there's no difference there. But it's not, it doesn't pervade everybody's life the way it used to. I remember a survey that was done in the late 60s in a magazine where they asked young married couples, or couples that were about to get married, what would be the first appliance you would buy when you got married for your new home? You know, they gave them choices. I can't remember, but stove, fridge, etc. And you know what one was? Record player was voted number one.
Today it would be a stainless steel fridge. That's the difference.
Well, that may be true, and I'm not suggesting that for people that love music, they love it any less than I loved it. But as a general kind of culture, there's too many other things that are occupying people's time. There was nothing more important to our generation than music.
Bernie, I thank you very much. Bernie Finklestein, stay with us to meet two extraordinary people who have formed an organization where Muslims and Jews get together. In this fractured world with more and more divisiveness, more and more hostility, there's an organization that gives us hope. The Canadian Association of Jews and Muslims, and with me are two members, significant members, we'll find out why in a minute. Samira Kaji, welcome, and Karen Mock, Dr. Karen Mock, you're a human rights consultant, and you, Samira, are the president and CEO of the Noor Cultural Center.
That's right.
You're a Muslim and you're a Jew. Why are you together in this organization, Karen?
We're together because of hope. We're now together because we're good friends and colleagues and appreciate that the work that both of us do in our own communities, but feel that in Canada, in particular, regardless of what issues may divide people internationally or politically, in Canada, a multicultural society, a diverse society where we believe in human rights for everyone, the Canadian Association of Jews and Muslims brings people together so that we can know more about what we have in common and fight anti-Semitism together, fight Islamophobia together, fight incidents of hate together, but more importantly, learn from each other celebrate our similarities and work together in hope.
And you, Samira, what motivated you to join the organization?
Well, I first came into contact with the CAJM, the Canadian Association of Jews and Muslims, when the twinning of mosques and synagogues was proposed to us. It was initiated in 2008. It was something that originated from an organization in New York called the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, and they came up with this beautiful idea of having a weekend every year that would bring pairs of mosques and synagogues together to come to know one another. And when it was proposed to me as a leader of my organization that we might want to twin in such an endeavor, I jumped to it, and we've been doing it ever since the inception.
And your twin is
Temple Emmanuel in Thornhill, I think it is. I'm not sure what you would call it, but it's a synagogue. It's a Reformed synagogue that we've been twinned with since 2008, and with whom we have now developed such a fantastic relationship that we do lots of things besides just during the annual twinning.
That was the idea of it. Actually, Temple Emmanuel is in North York. The idea, I was approached by the head of the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding in New York that they wanted to start this program, and they said, now, if we wanted also to be in Canada, because eventually they wanted it worldwide, which organization would host it? Should it be Canadian Jewish Congress, B'nai B'rith? And I said, no, it should be the Canadian Association of Jews and Muslims.
You made up the name on the spot.
No. The organization was started in 1996.
Oh, it had started.
Exactly. The organization was started in 1996 with Shahid Akhtar,
A Muslim.
and Jack Stevens, a Jew, an Iraqi Jew, actually. They shared an office together for years in the government department where they worked, in community and social services. And they were good friends. You know, one would go to one's house for an iftar, you know, at an evening of Ramadan. The other would go to the other's house for a Hanukkah celebration. They went, and they said, you know, in this day and age where people are becoming more and more fractious, why can't we create an organization to show that Jews and Muslims can get along? And they approached me. At the time, you'll remember, I was head of the League for Human Rights of B'nai B'rith Canada. And I became their facilitator in a way. We held the first meeting. Both of them, I think, lived in Mississauga at the time. And so they had some relationship with some synagogues out there and so on. But they wanted it to be a Canadian organization and start with the GTA. So actually, we hosted the first meeting at the League for Human Rights of B'nai B'rith, and we ended up having about 200 people. We had a panel. We had Rabbi Marmer on the panel, Erna Paris, Nuzat Jaffrey from the Canadian Muslim Women's Group. We had somebody from Palestine House, actually. It was already after the handshake. And it was a panel that spoke about how is it that here in this country we're going to work together and find common ground.
So it's been going since 1996.
1996, and sadly, Jack Stevens, Shahid and Jack were the co-chairs, co-founders. Sadly, he has passed away. And in 2001, 9/11, and Barbara Landau remembered that as a mediator, she'd had a person named Shahid Akhtar in her class who said he was with the Canadian Association of Jews and Muslims. She called him and said, do you still have the organization? Can I help? And are you going to do something? And Jack had just passed away recently. She became the co-chair. And together, Shahid Akhtar and Barbara Landau, myself, Samira, and others, it's grown. And we have continued to have the Canadian Association of Jews and Muslims.
Where do you have your programs?
Well, when there are the 20 programs, those are typically done between the two entities that are partnering. And so when we have our twinning with Temple Emmanuel, for example, during the weekend of twinning, they come to us for our Friday prayers, our congregational prayers on the Friday afternoon, and we go over to them for the Shabbat service in the evening. We've been over to them for the Shabbat service in the morning on the Saturday mornings, and then typically on the Sunday we have a joint event that involves music and celebration, but also involves an educational component. So we exchange visits at each other's sites, and I think that's very therapeutic because it familiarizes our congregations with the space of the other, the sacred space of the other.
And the culture of the other.
And the culture of the other. And it's, the few years that we've been doing it, 4 years, we're coming up to our 5th year, we found that there is so much, so the comfort level of one visiting the space of the other has just increased manifold.
Okay, we'll find out more about the Canadian Association of Muslims and Jews, a group that is making effort to get together, to work together, to know each other, in a minute. Karen, tell us about the programs that you have.
We hold regular programs as part of our meeting, and usually we have a Muslim perspective and a Jewish perspective. So this
Such
month,
as, give us an example.
well, this month we are going to have an imam and a rabbi speak about the Muslim and Jewish perspectives on organ and tissue donation. We are also having a program where we'll highlight the weekend of twinning, and we'll make it very public and invite Muslims and Jews from all over the city. We now have 5 pairs of synagogues and mosques. The weekend of twinning is in November annually. Or we've had a program where Zubaydah Vahid, a close colleague of mine, and I did a program called Recognizing and Countering Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, an anti-racist approach to building allies. And we helped train people. Not long ago, we had Sabi Hassan, a Muslim from the Jaffrey Mosque and Community Center, and Yossi Bahar, a Jew who from the Bahar Group in real estate,
also,
who had property.
an Iraqi Jew, right?
And what they did, they helped, Yossi helped Sabi found the first Muslim cemetery in the GTA. As a Muslim cemetery in the same way as we have the community one, where
Yes.
it will service many different factions of Islam. And so we had them for a program to show how they work together in keeping with Muslim law and so on. So our programs are many. We hold them in different places. So our program this month will be at Darchei Noam Synagogue. Another time, for example, part of the weekend of twinning, we hold a program, a large program for the public, and we hold it in different places, once at the Noor Center, once at Temple Sinai. And so whoever...
How free are people, Samira, to talk about what's really on their minds? In the Quran, friendly relations between Jews, two Jews, friendly relations are not encouraged. In fact, they're discouraged.
You know what? And that's where I disagree with you strongly. That's a perception that many people have, but it's an incorrect perception. And what I mentioned before, we started that we've had scholars from representing both both Judaism and Islam speak about the language and imagery of war in the respective traditions, and we've discovered that the passages in the Quran which talk about Jews in a hostile fashion are passages which refer to specific points in time and specific communities, and that's something that's part of early Islamic history, where there were Jewish tribes in the early community that the Muslim community was at odds with, and the passages that are usually picked up to cite and to upheld as theological injunctions are actually referring to very specific instances. And so
are you saying it's referring to that moment in time?
Yes, absolutely.
When Muhammad was trying to convert those Jewish tribes?
I wouldn't say he was trying to convert, and you will get.
And there was a battle. There was blood spilled.
There was strife between the communities because
But
I'm not
But anti-Jewish feeling is only confined to that time, is what you're saying, and not generalized to all of time.
What I'm trying to say is that the Quran does speak about Jews in terms which are castigating, but the context of those instances is very specific, and a good analysis exegesis of those passages of the text will show that those are referring to specific instances. The normative text of the Quran is to point towards fraternity between Muslims, Christians, and Jews, because we are recognized as people of Abraham. We are seen as people who believe in the one God. And my father always used to say, as a very devout Muslim, that you cannot be a good Muslim unless you're a good Christian and a good Jew to go with it. So the Quran, for example, has enormous number of references to Moses, has enormous number of references to Mary, mother of Christ, speaks of things that are part of
Well, how do you
Jewish
explain the Muslim persecution of Christians going on as we speak?
Well, I think if you're talking about what's happening currently, I think
Yes,
you have to see
currently.
it in the wider context of a whole political scenario that's occurring. You know, I presume you're talking about the
Egypt,
the Copts in Egypt. I don't think you can dissociate
the Christians in Israel, in Nazareth,
and
in
that's,
Palestine.
That's the Muslims doing it.
the,
The Christians in
Arab Muslims in Palestine, the Palestinians.
So is it the Muslims doing this to them? I'm not sure. You know, I think you can have different
Is
versions
that an
of,
interpretation, or as a noted journalist, Pakistan journalist, said, that a lot of the bad things going on in the world that we attribute to the Quran is really the writings after, 200 years after, the hadiths, the interpretations. Is that correct?
Yes, the hadith have come in various degrees of authenticity, and so yes, there are some things that are out in circulation which people attach themselves to, which actually don't bear out, don't pass.
Like head coverings and
No, but that's a different
another
issue.
story.
That's a different issue. There are a lot of
Cultural.
things. You know, it's a complex subject, and thousands of scholars have spent hundreds of years
these are the
talking
things
about
that bother
them.
people.
But
These are the-
no, exactly, and I understand. But I mean, I'm not going to be able to answer all of those questions
Does
on
it
my
come
own.
up?
But what I'm saying is, what I would say very unequivocally is that there is no normative position in Islam which says that there should be animosity between Muslims and Jews or Muslims and Christians.
Can I
that I'm very clear
Okay,
about.
wanna
we'll come
jump
back
in.
to this in just a minute. We've got to take a break. Muslims and Jews, and an association that works to bring them together. We're talking about Muslims and Jews and the issues that, for many people, are painful and ugly that they attribute to Muslim persecution of Christians, persecution of Jews, dhimmis, the second-class status if you're not a Muslim.
Okay, I've just written to people to explain to them that when you talk about dhimmis and the jizya, that is something that occurred back in the day under Muslim law, when there was when the Muslim empire prevailed, the Ottoman Empire or the caliphates before. Those were days pre-modern nation state, and so you can't be comparing the polities then or the governance of the denizens of those entities by the standards that we employ nowadays under the modern nation state, where we have citizenship that goes beyond, that looks at the rights of an individual regardless of their ethnicity or, you know.
I want to
so
jump in
that's-
here. I want to jump in. If we were to take some pieces out of the Talmud or a quote out of even the Torah, and it would speak about men and women and what they should or shouldn't do and how you should be with them or not be with them, or about homosexuals, then somebody could turn around and say, oh, all you Jews, you are all full of hate, you're this or that. So out of context is inappropriate. What happens is, however, people mix up the cultural with the religious. They mix up political with religious, people fighting for power, people fighting for land, and we have to separate it. As soon as we start generalizing to Muslims, it's exactly the same as when people generalize to us as Jews. Oh, you Jews are doing X.
Do you agree, Samira?
I totally agree.
And
I
that
totally
is,
agree.
we call that anti-Semitism when people do that.
I want to know how free people are in these settings to bring up the elephants in the room: terrorism, violence.
Very free.
How free are they?
Very
Is it
free.
brought up?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Muslims are always speaking out within their communities, without their communities. But, you know, there has to be an openness to hearing these things when they're said. There's a wonderful rabbi who runs the Shalom Institute, Rabbi Arthur Waskow. He compiles a list of all the denunciations that come in from across the world from leaders of Muslim congregations that denounce terrorism. But, of course, that never quite reaches people's ears.
And Doris, our view is you need to build trust. You cannot just have discussion or dialogue that's really debate and people yelling at each other. Oh, what about what's happening over there? So what happens is we help people, we park some of those difficult issues until we can have the conversation.
That people
and
feel
then
safe to bring it up in.
Exactly, and people always feel safe in our group. We don't feel safe when people start trying to scream each other down, and that doesn't happen. We say, we're going to do it from a position of knowledge, from a position of trust. I once had a leader of a Jewish organization say to me, he was criticizing something and he was saying what did or didn't happen. I said, no, excuse me, I was there. And that's not what happened. Here's what really happened. And you know what his answer to me was? Oh, Karen, you know that what really happened doesn't matter. What matters is people's perception of what happened. And so if that's the mentality, and if the media will exploit all the bad news, and they don't, the number of times that we have
Why don't we know about this organization?
we send press releases, we say what's going on,
Why
but it's
isn't it
the
being
bad
reported?
news. If we were to be having a
Well,
fight,
it
would
has been
report on
reported. It has been reported a little bit, but I think Karen is right.
There have
that
been
it's
wonderful
not
articles on
sensational
it.
enough. The first twinning we had, CBC picked up on it, and we were interviewed. And,
There was an article in the
but,
Star.
You know, frankly, I'm not about making a big deal about it myself because I feel it has to come naturally. We're not there to earn pats on the back.
That's
it's
right.
something that comes from deep from within us. If I felt that there was something Quranic, there was a Quranic teaching that suggested that I should not be friends with a Jew, I would never have taken my organization into the twinning. The reason I do it is because I feel very profoundly that there is an injunction to the contrary, that we are all people of the book, and even people not of the book, that at base we are all human beings, and the religious, the Quranic teaching that actually inspires Noor's mission and vision is the one that says, in God's words, as we believe, that we have created you into nations and tribes in order that you might come to know one another, and the best of you in God's sight is the one who's most conscious of God. What does that tell me? That it tells me that it is not the religion that I profess, that I'm Muslim or I'm Jew or I'm whatever, that takes me into the better state hereafter, but it's what I do. And that our diversity is purposeful, that it's there so we learn from one another. And as Muslims, we believe very, very strongly that Jews and Christians are part of the tradition, the monotheistic tradition that Abraham brought in.
These are Jewish values, human rights. We say nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. These are Jewish values of knowing your neighbor and loving your neighbor. As we said when we founded the organization, neighbor is not just a geographic concept. You know, neighbor is a relationship between people.
Doris?
And so...
Sorry, and I just wanted to mention that you mentioned the elephant in the room, and I think by that you're referring to the problems in the Middle East. And I will tell you that I personally have no desire to launch into a discussion on the Middle Eastern issues because I feel that is really the cause of the strife between Muslims and Jews, not a theological issue. I think that people look to theology and other ways to find an excuse for the animosity that is actually created by a political situation. It's not a theological situation. And for our part here in Canada, I say to our people that we don't need to talk about that because we're not involved. I'm not a direct stakeholder in that conflict. A lot of Muslims aren't direct stakeholders. A lot of Jews probably do consider themselves stakeholders because
of Israel.
Because of Israel. But I personally, and I don't see that there is anything normative in my religious teachings that requires me to be unfriendly with Jews. So on the contrary, I'm going to go about and make sure that the locus of conflict, which is in the Middle East, does not make toxic our relations here.
I wish you luck. I'd like to find out more about it as you progress, as you expand. Hopefully you will expand. And join us at another time.
God willing.
Inshallah.
B'ezrat Hashem.
Remember to be a mensch.